Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another Sports Community live stream. I'm Steve Pallas and joined again for a weekly session that we're going to have over the next 5 or 6 weeks or however long it takes us to explore this concept of understanding complaints and how do we prevent them in our clubs. Mike Ronchi, Mike, welcome to you.
Morning once again, Steve. How are you?
Yeah, well, mate. Well, now in your previous role of many years, you were the MPIO of Cricket Victoria. So that gave you a unique insight to the different complaints that came through a peak sporting body.
Yes, certainly MPIO chair for quite a bit. So I saw a bit go across the desk. Yes.
So in the session last week, and that was last Monday, for those that want to go back and have a look at that session, I encourage you to. We looked at the complaints or complaints around selection and what caused them, predominantly, what causes that type of complaint, and what clubs can put into place to prevent them from happening in the first place. Because that's where we're going to come from, Ronks, is not necessarily how to deal with them, because that's another topic in itself. But our concept is how do we kind of take away the need or take away the issue in the first place. So today we want to explore another topic that you raised as common was complaints around tribunals and those sorts of scenarios. So do you want to just give us a bit of a background and what are the different types of complaints that came through your desk relating to tribunals and hearings, etc.?
Yeah, well, look, my experience at Cricket Victoria, I was also involved in running the Premier Cricket competition and overseeing all the operations there, including the tribunal. So, you know, I've gained a fair bit of experience and learned a few things out of tribunals over the time. And when complaints come in or questions in regards to, I guess, the processes and trials and tribulations of various tribunals came across my desk, so I was in a fairly good position to be able to handle most of the issues and complaints that came along. Your common complaint was I didn't have any chance of an appeal, or the appeal was too harsh. You'd get a lot of phone calls around finals times, of course, leading into finals or after a semi-final or whatever, where someone was aggrieved that they'd been rubbed out, and would just ask for advice if they had any chance of getting off and around or appeal it. So getting back to our earlier theme in how do we, I guess, avoid these becoming complaints in the first place, it's very important, the setup and the whole governance of tribunals, and that can lead to a lot of alleviation of the complaints come through. So all tribunals vary from association to association, from sport to sport. So it just depends on how they're all set up and how they're governed appropriately.
So, I while you're talking about tribunals, back in my day as the CEO of the Footy League, the first tribunal hearing I went to was two brothers playing on opposition sides were reported for whacking each other, and I must admit it was actually quite a comical hearing, and the appeal was outside the jurisdiction of the sport. The appeal, I think the tribunal gave one verdict, and then the mother gave a very different and much more stronger verdict.
I'm sure it's a lot harsher.
But okay, so how do we set up, or what are the components of a good process around tribunal? And I think I'd like to also extend that to communication as well, because a lot of the issues that I saw related to people not necessarily knowing the process of tribunals and not necessarily preparing and then being quite surprised and then wanting to retrospectively kind of fix it.
Yeah, good questions. There's a couple of answers in there. First, I guess it's about the setup of the tribunal, and secondly, it's how a tribunal case or hearing is actually performed and heard. So in most associations or most sport, you want to try and keep your tribunal board as independent as possible. And when I say independent, in my opinion, tribunals should be totally independent from your sports board. You don't want the board getting mixed up in tribunals. And also, you want your tribunal members to be as independent as possible. And when I say independent, look, you need people that are have experience and knowledge and maybe even played the sport, but their independence, they've got to, like, you can't have a president of a club sitting. That's an easy example. You shouldn't have a president of a club sitting on a tribunal, or any playing
or
member, or any
opposition president.
Yeah, or any active person involved in clubs that compete in that association, and that sport shouldn't really be on a tribunal. Although, having said that, it is difficult to find the people to volunteer and do it, and it usually is people involved with the sport. But ideally, if they can remain as independent as possible, that's one way to start, I guess, alleviating that conflict of interest and everything that comes out of people sitting in positions at various clubs on tribunals.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about the league, the association board not sitting on tribunals, because while they might not have a direct conflict per se, the ramifications, the opportunity for tribunals to go a little bit pear-shaped and relationships to be tarnished ongoing is very real, isn't it? And so you don't want the association boards being influenced in any way, either during the tribunal or post the tribunal.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, more importantly, board members and even association administrators, they need to have good working relationships with the clubs and their stakeholders. So when you're playing judge and jury and you're suspending or fining or whatever, it compromises your working relationship straight away. So yeah, my best advice is always to have association administrators and board members to distance themselves from tribunals as much as possible in an ideal world. Yeah. And obviously, those also an advantage is to have people who have predominantly a legal background, or if they don't have a legal background, at least a background in processes and systems, and to be able to understand, I guess, bylaws, rules, how they're implemented, and how to run a tribunal appropriately. That's one of the biggest factors that will avoid any hiccups going through a tribunal where you receive complaints that they felt the process wasn't fair.
So that brings me to a question that I kind of grappled with back in my day in the sports administration side, was how did you at Cricket Victoria not so much recruit, but after you recruited the volunteer tribunal members, how did you train them on how to be an effective, fair, informed tribunal member?
Well, I guess working for a state body, you're straight away dealing with a fairly high level of personnel on a tribunal. Most of them were, most of our tribunal members were lawyers, solicitors. We even had a retired county judge. So it wasn't so much about educating them about the processes and how to make a decision. It was more just talking about every year we'd sit down with them pre-season. We'd just go through what the season setup was. We'd give them the latest update of the rules. We'd go through any questions that they have, because the rules change from time to time.
Yep.
Sometimes we might have a briefing for a year where our umpires director and management wanted to jump on a particular theme or a trend that was coming through, like umpire dissent or swearing or, whatever. We just sit down and brief the tribunal and just make it clear that there were certain things that we were going to focus on.
So the comms, when someone because most of the time there's the I guess almost the two groups, isn't it? There's the frequent tribunal repeat offender, but by and large, majority of the time people find themselves in front of a tribunal. It's, excuse me, it's a one-off scenario, and it's not one that they've got experience in, and they're not sure what the go is. So how do we make sure that we get all the information to the people that are coming to the tribunal to ensure we don't have issues at the back end? How did you do that at Cricket Vic?
Yeah, and look, in my experience, our tribunal chairs, so the setup that we would normally have would be we had a panel of anywhere between, from year to year, 9 to 11 tribunal members. A tribunal would exist of just one of those members being the chair, and then it would be myself and some other staff just as support. So, yes, I had my MPIO hat on. I had my administrator hat on. I was never involved in the decision making. It was always left to the chair of the tribunal. So essentially, it was set up like a magistrate court where you appear in front of the judge, and he's the judge and jury. Right from the very outset, our tribunal chairs were very good. As soon as everyone was in the room, just explaining what the process was going to be, step by step. That'd be the first thing they'd explain. This is how the night's going to run. We didn't make it overly officious and formal. It was a fairly, I wouldn't say casual, but everyone was made to feel comfortable of what process we're about to go through. So everyone clearly understood what the process of the tribunal was going to be as soon as we started.
So there was no real information sent to people other than time and place prior to the hearing?
No, other than, most people know when they've done wrong. The umpires would report a player. They'd let them know straight after the game. If they weren't known after the game, the umpires would send a report through anyway, and we as administrators would inform the club that Steve Pallas has been reported for dissent, and we need him to appear on Monday.
We could keep it, never be reported for dissent, wrongs.
Yes, no, never. So that was really the only formal process. I mean, everyone knows. Well, at the start of the year, we usually have a coach, captain coach briefing. We'll go through any rules that have been implemented, any that have changed from the year before, or any themes or any areas of the game that we're going to focus on.
So with the benefit of all the years of experience and looking back now, a bit of reflection, could the process be improved and issues at the back end be reduced by having some communications or upfront or for people coming into that process between match day and the tribunal hearing, or it was just because at that? Well, and I'll ask the question at two levels. One, you're at Premier level cricket, so that's quite a, as you say, an experienced level of cricketer getting to that point. Could it be improved at that level, or seeing it applied down at association level? Do you think that would be of benefit to have some comms going out prior?
Yeah, look, having been involved in community sport and as a president appeared in front of a few tribunals, not personally charged with anything, but representing a member. Look, you've just got to be really clear in your communications, open and transparent. Ensure that the person who has been reported or needs to appear in front of tribunal has a clear understanding of what they've been charged with. I've been involved in a tribunal where everyone came into the tribunal. It went through a process. No one was charged. The people that were asked to come in and explain the situation were asked to step out of the room, and then the tribunal had a chat, and those club members came back in and they were suspended straight away. Now, no one was charged, but they handed out a suspension. So you've got to make sure that what tribunal you're holding, it's very clear of the reasons why you're coming in, and there are certain consequences as a result.
And so that the whole concept of procedural fairness and natural justice, and the right to, the right to ensure that the tribunal has all the information that they need to make the correct decisions, really important.
Yeah, really important. One of the most common complaints we would get as member protection officers was they felt aggrieved that the process wasn't right. The biggest one was no right of appeal. These days, it's all about natural justice, and people need to and should have the right to explain their side of the story, and in certain context of how it all happened. So quite often we get lots of complaints about there was no sense of appeal, which again, if there is a road of appeal, again, it just takes that variable out, that they felt aggrieved and wasn't the tribunal wasn't fair. So again, that's how you set up your association rules, or even your club rules. In my opinion, everyone needs the chance to be able to defend and, I guess, explain their actions. So that natural justice of an appeal, in my opinion, should always be there.
Yeah, cool, absolutely. And it is interesting that there seems to be spikes around coming into the finals as tensions rise, and then the stakes get higher. That's often a time of spikes in tribunal cases. So again, going back to that, let's eliminate things. Is it worth administrators kind of letting clubs know that we're coming into this period of where traditionally tribunals would or not suspensions, reports become higher than general, and just making people aware of that?
Oh yeah, look, if an association are sending out newsletters or certain regular information as we get towards the end of seasons, yeah, you're right. The stakes certainly do get higher, and I guess it's not going to do any harm by the association or administrators just putting out a reminder, that behave appropriately and play the game within the confines of the rules fairly. Yeah, absolutely. One more other area where we can eliminate the variables, and a lot of associations are going down this track now, is prescribed penalties. That makes it a lot clearer as far as if you've made a certain offence, it equals a prescribed penalty. So that again itself eliminates any of the argument or argy-bargy. It's in writing. It's, if you've done this, you get this. So prescribed penalties is another way. And prescribed penalties are fairly subjective too. So they in themselves can I guess cause a little bit of angst.
Yeah, and they can also, but the benefit of them is the person has to accept it, or they can then go to the tribunal. I've got a question, and sorry, Suzanne, I missed the question just coming through. So, just wondering if you have dealt with the steps before the tribunal would be required. So again, that's the primary steps that most tribunals will be notifying the club of the report, the type of report, and the time and the place. Have you seen scenarios? I was interested in that comment where there was no report, they went out. I thought what you were going to do was say the charges were laid when they came back in the room, and then they were laid and suspended straight up without the opportunity to defend the charge. Is that what actually happened from a procedural point of view, or they just said, "Thanks for coming, thanks for the info, there's your suspension"?
It was the latter. Yeah, and the proper process is to actually, it's I guess it's up to a tribunal's or a controlling body's right to say, come in and explain yourselves, then charge you with something, and then it goes into a tribunal. You're in a tribunal situation. then, yeah, it was very unexpected to come back in after explaining the situation, what went on, the reasons for being, and whatnot. And it was more over a I guess an administration matter, not so much a disciplinary thing. Yeah, the proper procedure would have been to say, well, explain yourselves, and then if the tribunal's not satisfied, they can then say, okay, well, now we're not happy with that. We're going to charge you with blah, blah, blah.
Based on the information you provided.
Yeah, on that occasion, it just didn't happen. They handed down a fairly hefty sanction, and of course the club appeal.
Did they win the appeal because of procedural justice?
No, they didn't.
Would have had a pretty good grounds, I would have thought. So it's a really interesting area, tribunals, and the saying we don't play for sheep stations seems to get thrown out the window around finals time, and that creates a lot of the issues and the complaints. Yeah,
no, absolutely. But I guess in summary is your setup is the most important. Get the right people, the right processes. In my opinion, ensure there's always natural justice and you hear both sides of the story. That's absolutely crucial. And anyone who is being charged or asked to appear in front of the tribunals needs, clear, open, transparent communication. So that person knows exactly, or group of people know exactly what they're going into a hearing for.
Yeah, so they can provide all the information to get the best decision.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, that's just communication. It's not fair to I guess throw people into a tribunal situation where they're not really clear on why they're appearing, and I guess they end up being ambushed, I guess, and not prepared for the hearing appropriately.
Well, mate, thank you very much for sharing your experience on the tribunal side. Next Tuesday we'll delve back into almost the other side, which is the club governance, and what are the issues that you see coming through club governance. And we probably get 1 or 2 phone calls a week through the office here of club governance going haywire, or at least not following their own club rules. So I'll look forward to seeing where you take that conversation next week.
All right, look forward myself. Thank you.
All right, and so tomorrow, so for the next couple of weeks, at least 4 or 5 weeks, we'll be dealing with and exploring the mysterious world of complaints. Tomorrow, we're looking at, again, doing sport differently Wednesday. So really looking forward to having a chat with Kate from the Warrnambool Triathlon Club, who's going to share their experience as how they created a format of triathlon called From Couch to Coast that got predominantly aimed at women, getting women and families off the couch and into triathlon. It's going to be a ripper of a story and a lot of learning for us all. Thursday, we'll see what comes up in the news, and Friday is, as always, eSport Friday. So, Mike, thank you until next week. And to everyone else, thank you for being part of our sports community.